Rumble in Tallahassee, big battles already underway there. Even before the legislature convenes next week, we'll have a preview.
Fake news doesn't tell the truth.
Well, the real news didn't have the chance this week as the White House press briefing became an invitation-only affair. We will take that freeze out to the roundtable.
Oscar time, Hollywood's biggest night may get political. What will the Oscar winners say? Nikki Mohan is live from the red carpet.
Good morning and welcome aboard. Great to have you here. A coast-to-coast program for you today, and we begin on the road to Tallahassee.
State lawmakers, their annual session begins in just 9 days, and from all indications, it's going to be a doozy. The governor and speaker of the House, both Republicans, have been feuding for weeks over funding for Enterprise Florida and Visit Florida. These are two agencies that get millions of dollars from taxpayers.
The governor wants those agencies fully funded. The House Speaker wants them gone. He calls it corporate welfare. And we begin right there with State Representative Jose Felix Diaz is a Republican representing District 116 from Doral to Kendall. He chairs the House Regulatory Affairs Committee. And State Senator Oscar Braenon is a Democrat from Miami Gardens and the minority leader in the state Senate. He represents District 35, which includes South Central Broward and North Central Miami-Dade. Good morning.
Gentlemen, great to have you come in. Yes. Representative, let me begin with your point of view and then we'll get to Senator Braenon. But here we've got this feud between the governor and your leader, House Speaker Richard Corcoran, tough, smart guy, who says that the money for Visit Florida, which promotes tourism, Enterprise Florida, which provides tax incentives, obviously, for businesses to come or stay here, he says that's corporate welfare. The governor says nonsense. We need it. How's that going to work out?
Well, I think it's a good indication that at this point in session, all we're fighting about is, a couple millions of dollars in the budget. We're not talking about a budget that hasn't been balanced. We're talking about we're not talking about any issues with the way that the government is working. We're focusing on $80 million in an $80 billion budget. And as a matter of fact, this week, the speaker took a big step forward and actually said, okay, we're not going to gut Visit Florida. There was an amendment done in the House Appropriations Committee to say Visit Florida, just cut their budget a little bit.
But isn't this about more the concept of paying business incentive versus the execution? I mean, especially with Visit Florida, I think we talked about on this program the pit bull debacle, where, to Pitbull's credit, he came out and said what he was making, where the state had kept it under wraps. And so the execution of paying these millions of dollars to businesses and who's getting it and what's getting it seems to be the issue.
Well, the question is the results, right? I mean, we saw it in the Pitbull issue that there was a lack of transparency and that one particular agency, Visit Florida, was hiding the ball. And when you're talking about taxpayer dollars, over $1 million paid to one performer, I think the expectations are that they're going to be transparent and they're going to be honest about the way that they think the government should be spending money.
Senator Braenon, a lot of people in the tourism industry, Florida's #1 industry, think that the money spent on Visit Florida is money well spent. It pays dividends. It brings people down here. How do you see it?
Yeah, I have to agree with them. I think being our #1 industry, we're competing with other states that spend money on marketing. I believe that the concept of marketing works. I think it's effective. I think it's a time-held tradition. And because it's our largest industry, and it's not something that we have a monopoly on, right? There's a beach in California, South Carolina, and all across Texas. There's sunshine all across the South. Yeah. So we have no monopoly on it. We have to do things to make ourselves look attractive.
There are, if I may, Glenna, there are some ways the money has been spent that you kind of think to yourself, what does this, how do you rationalize this? I mean, there was more than $1 million was spent so a second league British soccer team wore signs on their uniforms that said Florida.
I agree about the transparency. I think, and I like the step of us going and not trying to eliminate. See, the speaker was saying eliminate, get rid of completely at first, and that's where I just disagreed. Transparency, I'm all for, and for saying that there should be some accountability, but I think there's also some numbers that we look at, and since Visit Florida has started, we have seen an uptick in our tourism dollars.
Yeah, Representative, weigh in on that, because there are other states who provide a lot of incentive money. And although I know Governor Scott's argument is we've cut regulations, we have a very good environment for business, but there is competition for that business. And so even, just the film industry in Miami that's losing incentives, they're having issues with that. How do you answer that state competition argument?
Well, there is. I mean, that's a problem. In the abstract, if nobody was having incentive programs, it'd be an easy decision. Nobody would do them. But yeah, there's competition, absolutely. The good news is on the tourism side, yeah, we're breaking records. This year, we had over 100 million visitors in Florida. But a big part of that is also because of the private sector. This year, Universal Studios, included a new Harry Potter ride that brings, hundreds and thousands of people to our state. Disney's upgrading their facilities, bringing Avatar and all these other, magnetic programs.
Do they get incentive money?
They're not getting incentive money from Florida. They're doing it on their own. And that's part of the argument. When Visit Florida started, it was a private-public partnership that there was a one-to-one match between where they got their money and when the state reimbursed them. Now, the disparity is huge, and the state is forking over almost all their money, and that's probably not a great thing.
But people are coming to Disney or Universal because they market what they're doing. And that's why people come. That's what we're saying. We're trying to get people to come to Florida. We're trying to do the same thing, market what we're doing. The concept is in the private sector as well as the business, as well as the public sector.
But when you choose who gets those incentives, you're picking, as I heard someone say, winners and losers.
Winners and losers,
Yeah.
correct.
I mean, how do you tell the small business person who has worked so hard for decades building a business that he or she is not getting that money?
I would actually say that Visit Florida and Enterprise Florida are two different arguments. I would say that talking about money to market Florida, to tourism, which is our biggest industry, and these incentive programs are two different arguments, at least for me. I don't stray too far from saying it may just be considered corporate welfare when you do these incentive programs. But then I say, when you talk about tax cuts, it's almost the exact same thing. We're talking about apples to apples, whether you giving them something or whether you're just not taking it. So I want to hear the same conversation being held when we talk about eliminating the corporate tax, the commercial lease tax. All these things are doing the same thing, taking money away from our coffers here in Florida.
Yeah. Representative, let me kind of pull the focus back a little bit here. Talk about the tone of the upcoming session. March 7th is when you guys begin in Tallahassee. And I think that the assumption was many months ago, it was going to be smooth sailing. You got a Republican governor, you got a Republican controlled House, you've got a Republican controlled Senate. You are the Senate minority leader. And it has been anything but full smooth sailing. What's going on here?
Pep, you're not going to tell them it was smooth, right? It was planned to be smooth.
I don't think there was ever any expectation that it would be totally smooth. I think that, you have probably more happening at this point of committee meetings than you've ever had. I mean, we're swallowing water out of a fire hose, working on so many different issues. The Supreme Court has kicked out our workers' compensation system. A federal court has deemed that the exclusivity that we give the Seminoles in the gaming compact has been breached, and now we're in the process of reevaluating that. So there's a lot on the table that we need to look at, including the death penalty case and the fact that the Supreme Court has also thrown out a death penalty statute. So there's a lot that's at the table, and that creates tension.
Right, but are you not going to, you must pass a bill in both houses that says the death penalty must be unanimous because the courts have said you've got to do that.
We must, and we also have to pass a balanced budget. That's one of the requirements of our Constitution. So that creates strife. That creates a climate where the three parties, the House, the Senate, and the governor, are each going to try to use whatever leverage they have on this bill to affect that bill. And that's why you're starting to see these public arguments. Ultimately, I think everything's going to be okay, but there's just a lot to deal with
weigh in
this
on
year.
that?
I hope that everything is okay. But I will tell you, we really have to come together and respect each other before that happens.
The danger of having these kind of conversations about a legislative preview is there's so much to talk about.
much.
So
All
let's
right.
take a 2-minute break, and shall we come back?
Yes, we will.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back on this Sunday morning. Live in our studio, our state representative, Jose Felix Diaz of Miami, State Senator Oscar Brannan. Let's talk, gentlemen, about gambling and whether it should be expanded or not. Senator Brannan, the view in the Senate is that it should be expanded to areas which have already had voters pass referendums saying we want slot machines. Representative, the House is much more conservative. It says, all right, the Seminoles can have craps and roulette for the next 20 years, but no more expansion.
Well, that's the first version of the bill. Last year, we started at a different place. We scaled it back because the Senate bill was so expansive. We had to be a little reactionary. But we do understand that there are many counties that continue to vote to expand gambling. We believe that we need to take that into consideration. But a compact is a deal between the state and a tribe,
Right.
and the tribe, what they're paying for is exclusivity. Otherwise, they do not pay the state a dollar out of their proceeds.
$5 billion, isn't that what they agreed initially to pay the state?
Well,
over what?
Over
10
over 20 years, it
years?
would have been a $10 billion
$10
deal
billion.
last year.
Yeah.
And we're looking at the numbers now, but it's hard to justify those large numbers, a $3 billion guarantee over 7 years, if you have 15 new casinos.
And so, Senator, how do you take that and the fact that the Seminoles can take something like that to court and have taken it to court? I mean, where do you go with that?
Well, I think that one of the things that was said was some people passed referendums already. So if the people are saying that this is what we want, we're talking about slots, which we do now. That's already legal in Florida. That's legal in several counties. So there's an exclusivity as far as what the Seminoles want. And in our bill, it gives the Seminoles even more. So the argument of whether Florida is a gaming state or not is over. We're a gambling state. We gamble. They gamble here. They gamble in the casinos. So that we have a state-sanctioned gambling in the lottery. So that's happening. So I don't really know about this whole contraction and trying to protect Florida.
Well, there are a lot of licenses that
Right.
are active out there that are not being used, and people are squatting on them just in case something were to open up so that they too can get
And we pull those
slot
back in the
machines. And
Senate bill.
all referendums are not created equal, and that's part of the problem here. Because there's no guarantee that they're going to get casinos, there's nobody actually going against these referendums when they come up for vote.
Senator, one of the top priorities of the Senate Majority Leader, that is Joe Negron of Stewart, who comes from an area that was devastated by all this terrible toxic algae from the lake, he wants to spend, $700 million of state money bonded out and buy 60,000 agricultural acres south of Lake Okeechobee for a huge reservoir water cleansing area so the water then flows cleanly into the Everglades and Florida Bay. Does that have a future?
Well, it's being discussed in the Senate because we're looking at the problem versus the solution suggested, just the solution suggested by the Senate president. We realize that solution has a lot of hurdles, a lot of obstacles.
Yeah, big sugar is the main obstacle.
Unintended consequences. And so we're now starting to look at what are all of our options. Is it making sure that the dikes and levees are secure? Is it making sure that the water coming in is not as polluted? Is it looking at these deep water wells, deepening the wells that we are using the property that we already have south of the lake? So we're starting to discuss all options on the table because we realize there are some obstacles other than the whole big sugar. Sugar is an industry south of the lake, and there are people that work for them. That's also an issue for us.
So, but the question though is, if that doesn't have a future, then what does?
Then what
Considering
does?
that South
And
Florida's entire water
And
system
that's the
depends on
discussion
it.
right now.
Yeah.
If there is a real problem, if we don't have the support of the governor's office, if we don't have the support of the House, one of the things I learned early on in this process, two is more than one. And so in order to get something done, you have to find a solution.
Yeah.
The toxic green sludge is a serious problem. The salinity in Florida Bay are serious problems.
Right.
If the solution that is being suggested by the Senate doesn't seem to have life, we have to start looking at, well, what is a solution? Because we have to find a solution to this.
Representative, I asked House Speaker Richard Corcoran a number of weeks ago when I interviewed him, how does he look at spending the Amendment 2 money, which voters approved, by 70%? The money is there to do this. He was kind of tepid. He said, well, we'll look at it. He didn't commit yay or nay.
Well, we've been spending the money, and we've been trying to beautify our springs. We have some of the most beautiful springs in the world, and we've had to clean those up the last few years. We've put additional dollars into Everglades restoration, so it's not like we're not complying with the will of the voters. It's just a matter of seeing whether or not we're in agreement with the senator as to what the plan should be for what happens south of the lake.
Yeah, I should correct myself. Thank you. It was Amendment 1 on the 2012
Yes.
ballot? 2000.
I knew what you meant. I knew what you meant.
Well, thank you.
The
I know
answer
you did.
is consistent with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't the medical marijuana amendment,
Right.
which is a different story
story,
altogether, and
you
we
know.
can talk about that too.
And voters overwhelmingly voted to spend money for land conservation.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to do. Like, honestly, I mean, when the voters say something, which is kind of goes back to my gaming point, voters are asking for it. That's kind of how democracy is set up. That's what we need to do. And it probably was not meant for administrative fees. It was not meant for, I mean, as much as people want to do things that might help us buy land, like septic tanks and replacement of septic tanks, that's not what that money was for. That money was for us to buy land for the purpose of making Florida more beautiful.
Once again, there are bills that have been introduced by Representative Greg Stubbe, I believe, from Sarasota, that would make open carry the law of Florida. Anybody who has a concealed weapons permit could carry a gun openly on a campus, on a college, in government meetings. Is that going to pass?
It hasn't passed yet, and he's a senator now.
Senator.
So the
All right,
difference between
my second mistake this morning. All right.
the difference between Senator Stubbe and Representative Stubbe is that Representative Stubbe was limited to 6 bills. Senator Stubbe does not have a bill limit.
64?
So I
He's
think
at
he has
64
There's
60
2
plus
dozen.
bills.
I printed them out. There's 2 dozen of
and
them.
most of
Yeah.
them are gun bills. He's the son of a sheriff. This is an issue that's very important to his district. Obviously, some of it doesn't take into account some of our urban concerns versus rural concerns, and that's why the process exists to allow every issue to be vetted one by one.
Last word on the gun bills?
I think it's going to have a big problem. I just don't see its path to any of those 67 bills. And I'm just playing the 7 or 8 gun bills he has. We've been breaking them up. I think they still have a problem. I think the urban concerns, as Pepe pointed out, versus the rural concerns is a big issue.
All right. Senator Brandon, great to have you come in. Representative Diaz, thanks very much. Appreciate it. All right, coming up, we're going to take this and so much more to the round table. All right, then, it is time to take a closer, more analytical look at the week's top news stories with our Powerhouse Roundtable.
And we have a great one for you today. Some introductions first. Veteran journalist Rosemary O'Hara is the editorial page editor of the Sun-Sentinel. Ed Pozzoli is president of the Tripp Scott Law Firm in Fort Lauderdale and an active voice in the Republican Party. H.T. Smith is a Miami attorney and a South Florida legal icon and a law professor at Florida International University. Welcome, everybody.
Good morning. Great to have you here. Rosemary, the Sun-Sentinel, your page, has quite a good editorial this morning, which, as I read it, essentially, if I'm reading correctly, says, Visit Florida deserves taxpayer support in the legislature. Enterprise Florida, not so much.
That's
Explain.
Right. Okay, Visit Florida is help telling the world about the glory of Florida, why to come here to visit, bring your tourist dollars here. And the state economist said that tourism, because of the growth in tourism, it's actually off-putting some of the loss to general revenue in real estate. So I actually disagree with you on that soccer team. I think having Visit Florida on the thing, because the United Britain is such a big, brings so many tourists here.
What about the Pitbull? Are you agree on the Pitbull contract, the $1 million?
No, but that gets to why does the legislature pass these things that allow these organizations to hide so much? Right. There's too many exemptions to the Sunshine Law. That's a separate issue. Yeah. There needs to be more transparency. For me, on Enterprise Florida, it is about government picking winners and losers in the marketplace. And when the governor is out there trumpeting the opening of a Wawa, which I hear they're really great stores.
Wait, what's
Subway,
a Wawa?
Oh, it's a convenience store that makes great food.
Oh.
But apparently it's a real competitor to the owner of 5 Subway franchises down the street.
Right.
Why
Or
are we?
7-Eleven or
Yes, and some of these big outfits that have gotten hundreds of millions of dollars, like Sanford Burnham in Orlando, leave town. They get the money, they're not going to pay it back. So, let the marketplace, who's going to decide which businesses survive and which don't. Ed?
I'm so happy you're on our side now. Marketplace, let the marketplace decide. Let's keep that consistent through the rest of the debate now. Rosemary, this is, you point out a great piece around this. There's a debate that how are we spending limited government resources? And should we be spending it on Enterprise Florida? Should we be spending it on Visit Florida? Those are the debates, and that defines the debate and discussion between where Richard Corcoran is and where Rick Scott is.
But what we now have is empirical data that we can look at with regard to Enterprise Florida. There was a research done of 8 research companies that we'd given money to.
Right.
And basically they're supposed to get a certain number of jobs as a result of receiving millions and millions of dollars. Only 1 out of 8 were able to meet those goals. This is corporate welfare as far as I'm concerned. Number one, the governor is asking for $250 million to give to individuals, picking winners and losers. This is one of the things that I absolutely positively agree with my Republican friend on. We shouldn't be picking winners and losers. And that's why Visit Florida is so great. We are a destination for the world.
Right.
We've got to promote that. We've got to continue to promote that. And I think in every Wawa can benefit, Subway can benefit, Republicans can benefit, and Democrats can benefit.
But here's the argument. Rick Scott will make the argument that says the marketplace includes other states that are driving money to try to draw businesses to relocate to their state. And so his counter would be that Florida needs to participate in that marketplace to try to counter, like Texas or Louisiana or Georgia as an example, to drive businesses and job opportunities to our state. That's his counter.
And I never thought I would agree with the Koch brothers, but the organization they fund called Americans for Prosperity is driving this debate in other states too.
Right.
And so you're right. If we get away with Enterprise Florida, we're not on a level playing field. But it's got to start somewhere, and the same conversation is happening in other states too. So let's dial it back.
But wouldn't the argument be, if Florida is to be a state that is so attractive, it's about good schools, so people will move their kids. It's about a good regulatory system, which I know is one of
transportation.
Transportation, not sitting in gridlock on I-95. Isn't that the argument behind it?
Yeah, that's the argument behind it. And I have no problem with the concept. But we have data showing that what we're doing is not working. I want us to compete with the rest of the nation with regard to the job. But you look at the empirical data, and the empirical data says the concept works, but not Enterprise Florida. So that's what I oppose.
All right, if we can, I want to move on to the big national and local story of the week, which is the Trump administration's decision to have ICE and Border Patrol go after not just criminal aliens, but basically anybody in the country undocumented. And Rosemary, for South Florida, we're talking, at least I know in Miami-Dade and Monroe, 150,000. Certainly there are a lot in Broward County, Palm Beach County. So this, if they say we're not going to have mass deportations, but people are frightened.
People don't want criminal, illegal, or undocumented people here. So the debate from last week, where sanctuary cities and should those in the jails be held for ICE deportation, who disagrees with that? But the idea of using our deputies and our local police to become the immigration enforcement and asking people for their papers when they stop them absolutely is over the top. And we're not going to be able to fund this system. And we have to create, what happens? We have to create judicial systems. We have to create detention. We're going to do this for 12 million people. What are we not going to do if we fund that?
And we're going to have 10,000 new ICE agents and 5,000 new Border Patrol. Just the other day, it was reported in today's paper that Muhammad Ali's son was stopped. Ask about his religion. That is not what we should be doing.
Before we go further, I want to play a soundbite from the president in the middle of the week on this subject that really caused a lot of consternation. Here's President Trump.
We're getting gang members out. We're getting drug lords out. We're getting really bad dudes out of this country. and at a rate that nobody's ever seen before.
Bad hombres, Ed.
Bad dudes.
Well, let me go back to your opening. I think was slightly incorrect, Michael. It is about deporting illegal immigrants who have committed crimes. And so when we look at that, I think there's almost 100% support amongst American citizens around both protecting our border and removing illegal immigrants, those who are not here legally, and removing those who committed crimes. Now, look, this is a controversial issue. I don't know why. All the president did was double down on enforcing the law. And you're a man of the law, HT. That is the law of the land. If you want to petition the Congress to change immigration laws, then go ahead and do so and make the changes and do whatever you want with immigration. But right now, all the administration is doing is enforcing the law.
Not really, not exactly. And I am a man of the law. And when Obama was really getting rid of the bad dudes, he was the deporter-in-chief. That's what they call him, right?
Yeah.
But right now, the problem is that Donald Trump has given too much latitude to the people, the ICE and others. And so, do you go to jail for a broken? Do you picked up for a broken tail light? Because of you pick up for a fight? I don't know.
Well, if
we don't know.
If you've got an ICE detainer, and then you are held, the likelihood is that person is going to be deported, but it would be for a more serious felony other than a broken tail light.
But he has not been as clear about his intentions for that 10,000 force as you were just now.
But John Kelly has.
But who speaks for the administration?
John Kelly has, and he's point blank said that's what we're looking at. And I think honestly, I don't understand the controversy here. Put aside the president's gift for hyperbole, but let's stay focused on exactly what the law says, and they're enforcing the law.
Well, so don't listen.
All right, everybody hold your thoughts for a minute. We do have to take a break for a minute. Stay with us. We'll be back with more Roundtable. Well, we are in the midst of a rock and roll roundtable. We have a great one here today. Ladies and gentlemen, let's move on, if we can, to the break that members of Congress just took this past week. Later on, we're going to have a little interview with Bill Nelson, who was in South Florida. One member of Congress who came home but didn't make himself readily available, in my view, is Senator Marco Rubio. He was invited to a town hall meeting, Ed, in Tampa. He chose not to attend. That's all right. He was invited to one in Southwest Miami-Dade. He chose not to attend. He did go to a roundtable discussion at Jackson Memorial Hospital about opioids and the abuse of that and his interest there, and more power to him. But he really doesn't seem eager to sit down with a lot of his constituents.
Well, I'm not going to defend. He might have scheduling issues. I'm not going to get into that. What I am going to say is that we've seen it across the country around these town halls, and people are concerned about what the future of their health care is.
Sure.
Obamacare, let's understand, is failing. Big companies, Aetna, Humana, are pulling out. These exchanges are a failure. Rates are up. Choices are down. Relationships with doctors have been broken. I mean, this is an utter failure. It's a tremendous increase in taxes and a big burden on our economy.
All right, so let's see a replacement.
And that's what they're doing. And so there's one thing that I think we need to understand. President Trump only has so much power through executive order constitutionally. We've had this debate before about President Obama signing executive orders. Mm-hmm. We don't want him signing an executive order getting rid of Obamacare and replacing it. That's a legislative process, and it's a complicated one. We're talking about 20% of our economy, and we're talking about the most dearest of relationships that patients and doctors have. And there's a legitimate debate, even amongst Republicans, about how to do that, how you put market forces involved as opposed to a government mandate, how do you get rid of the taxes, how you do some of this with HSAs, or being able to sell across lines, all of those things.
It's complicated.
Well,
Nobody disputes that.
Well, Marco Rubio, along with the president, promised his supporters, on day one, I will repeal and replace Obamacare. Now we're on day 40, and what do we learn? For 7 years, they've been talking about this, and they're just like the dog that chased and caught the truck. I caught it. I don't know what the hell to do now, because I caught it. I guess I'll jump in the back and get a ride. Number one, people have not, clearly the system is better than it used to be. You have a child born with autism, and then you go to the insurance company to try to put your child on insurance, and they said, oh, they have a pre-existing condition. You said that's how they were born with it. They can never get insurance. You have someone have a serious heart problem, and they said, oh, you had $1 million cap, and so you're on your own from that. We've definitely improved things, and now the Republicans are in a real bind. They have no plan at all. Now, Ed is here. Ask Ed to tell you what their plan is. We figuring, like my daughters say when I tell them to do work, we fixing to get to it, Daddy, but they never get to it.
Well, I'll tell you what I'm interpreting their plan to be. And first off, I would say that I would disagree with several of it is flawed, but it is not utterly fatal. But what I hear that their plan is to allow people to have health savings accounts and to get tax credits and then buy insurance across state lines. How does somebody who is middle income and can't afford today's premiums now save money incrementally for insurance when they need it today? Tax credits aren't really going to help lower and moderate means people buy insurance, and buying across state lines, I guess that allows that you can buy catastrophic policies, but you can buy those today. And just one more point on the town halls. You know, we saw these 8 years ago,
right,
when at the rise, and it gave rise to the Tea Party. So maybe today's town halls, and they do want to talk about Obamacare, and there are people who are dependent on Obamacare to get access to health care. Maybe today's town halls and the energy there will lead to some new populist movement that helps right the ship.
Now, the biggest issue in dealing with the replacement issue deals with Medicare. And so the Medicare expansion piece of that has to be dealt with. Medicaid expansion piece of that has to be dealt with. That's the most difficult issue with respect to impacting individual states.
Well, and also Bloomberg is reporting that the plan as it stands now will not be able to cover a significant portion
and
of
you
the people
can't pay
who now
for
have
it without an individual, without a mandate.
But
it won't.
Wait, what happened to the HT that started out all full throttle with the marketplace? I heard this marketplace argument for Rosemary and from you in the first issue, and this doesn't apply to healthcare. No, wait.
But just like the First Amendment, there are exceptions.
No.
Do you think people have a fundamental right to health care, or only if you can afford it?
I think people have to have a skin in the game when they purchase health care, and without a skin in the game when they purchase health care, they don't care what it costs. We need to change that dynamic, and that's what some of these plans are. And I'm going to tell you, there's like 2 or 3 major plans that are being debated, and the guts of those are there. And with all due respect, 40 days in dealing with Obamacare and having that impact. No, I'm sorry.
7 years and 40 days. They've been complaining for 7 years that it was bad.
Let Republicans work it through, and we're going to see this happen in the next couple of months. Whether you like it or not, we can debate that.
Well, you admit that Donald Trump said that he would do it on day one. Didn't he?
And he did. He issued an executive order to his extent.
Don't do away with pre-existing conditions.
Before we run out of time, I do want to bring up the question for those of us who are avid news followers and listen to National Public Radio locally on WLRN, that there is a big dispute there over whether the school superintendent, Alberto Carvalho in Miami-Dade, is going to really bring WLRN and have these reporters work for the school district or for an intermediate body. And Rosemary, you've also editorialized. What's your view here?
I think that the superintendent, Alberto Carvalho, overreacted in responding to what was, yes, a concerning financial irregularity, a miscommunication that WLRN reported to the government, reported to the school board, and addressed, and is continuing to figure it out. So he's right about that. But to take that issue and to say all these reporters now have to work for the school board, and he just, WLRN is a community treasure that has grown into one that helps tell those stories of our community. The other thing I would say is he's backing off of that, and he has this little group of Miami-Dade people, but WLRN goes from
serves
Key West to
Palm
northern
Beach.
Palm Beach.
Yes, it
you know,
does.
let some people from Broward County weigh in on whether we want to listen
Well,
to the
I
school
know,
board
hold on,
meetings.
I know Superintendent Alberto Carvalho watches the show. So, Superintendent, there's some good advice for you. All right, we've run out of time. Thank you all for coming in.
Thank
Free
you.
market prevailed here today, Ed. All right.
Coming up, it is Oscar night tonight, and the award ceremony will most certainly have a political theme, and we're going to have that live from the red carpet next.
As movie makers and movie watchers like us get ready for the biggest night of the year, Spotlight also is turning to Hollywood politics.
A travel ban and calls for boycotts have already impacted the 89th Academy Awards. Nikki Mohan is right there live on the red carpet with a preview of the party and the politics. Good morning, Nikki. I know it's early there, right?
Oh, we've been up since 4 a.m. Happy to be with you, Glenna and Michael. Yes, everyone interested to see or hear what Jimmy Kimmel and everyone else will say on the Oscar stage today. Last night they had the Independent Spirit Awards and they were very political. They were going for, they took all the digs they possibly could. And of course, again, today everybody will be looking at the Oscar stage, especially since Meryl Streep will be a presenter once again. But for the folks in Miami, you'll be happy to know that last night Moonlight cleaned up at the Independent Spirit Awards. Now they're keeping their fingers crossed for an Oscar. Let's take a look at the Independent Spirit Awards from last night when they went up to get their award for Best Feature Film. This was the 6th award of the night. They also got an award for Best Director, Best Cinematographer, Best Editing. And, you know, Moonlight was made by many people in Miami, but also by 6 FSU alums, all friends from film school, graduated in 2003 and 2004. Barry Jenkins, the director, had a special message for Miamians.
To the crew, to anybody whose name was on a call sheet for those 25 days down in Miami in that hot weather when getting to the stage seemed an impossibility, I dedicate this to y'all, to Melinda Taskin, my script supervisor, who has so much more experience than me and who taught me the beauty of listening.
And how excited were they? Well, Jaden Piner, his brother Jordan, and Alex Hibbert, that's how they do it. That's how they break it down Miami style here in LA. Of course, Glenna and Michael back out here on the red carpet. They will all be walking the red carpet today. We will get them. We will get everything here from the Academy Awards today. I will be here live all day, 24 hours, just for you guys. Live in Hollywood, Nikki Mohan, Local 10 News. Back to you, Glenna and Michael.
Thank you, Nikki. And you have that star glow about you, too. Thank you very much.
That's lack of sleep. Civil rights and discrimination again took center stage this week, this time transgender students and the most basic of needs in question. All that and Michael's talk with Senator Bill Nelson is straight ahead.
Members of Congress took this past week off to return to their states and districts to hear from their constituents, and boy, did they ever. Senator Bill Nelson visited South Florida one day this week, and he stopped by Channel 10 to sit down with me for a chat. Here's some of that interview. Let's begin with immigration. The Trump administration has released a couple of new policies where it is clear that they are going to be much more aggressive on finding and deporting people who are in the country without authorization, undocumented people. The Obama administration concentrated on criminal aliens. Looks like the Trump administration is just going to go after anybody who's undocumented. Does that sit well with you?
Doesn't sit well with me, and it doesn't sit well with the American people. I think if they really do try a roundup of a lot of people, first of all, it's going to be harmful to our economy. And some of the first people are going to be big businessmen, medium-sized businesses that rely on a lot of this workforce. But it's going to be tugging at the heartstrings because you're going to see families ripped apart. Right. This is why we so desperately need full, comprehensive immigration reform. which we actually passed in the Senate about 5 years ago.
Yeah, but the House, it
But
died in the House.
and now there's no chance to pass it in the Congress right now.
Senator Nelson, at his news conference a week or so ago, the president said, told the kind of a fiery, combative news conference, my administration is running like a fine-tuned machine. Do you think it is?
Well, that certainly wasn't the case with General Michael Flynn. It certainly wasn't the case with his executive order on the immigration and the Syrian refugees. So I think the president says a lot of things that somewhat stretch the truth, and I'm being charitable. I personally like him, by the way. I know him from Palm Beach over the years. But he has certainly strained a lot of things as the incumbent president. Personally, he's engaging, but he sure has. By the way, he's got some good people around him on the cabinet, the 2 Marine generals, etc. But then look at who he's put in as the head of the EPA, the head of HHS, the Attorney General, Education.
Yeah.
These are not folks in the mainstream of America today.
Senator, let me ask you about Cuba policy. This is something you've been involved in for decades. Your colleague, Marco Rubio, had dinner at the White House last week with his wife and the Trumps. Afterwards, the president said, I agree with Senator Rubio on Cuba. I think he was referring to human rights abuses. I don't think you disagree with objecting to the human rights abuses.
Right.
But what about commerce? What about doing business with Cuba? If you have a chance to speak to the president, what would you say?
Well, I tell him exactly what I believe, that I think we ought to have the free travel to Cuba. I think that's in the interest of families, families supporting families, unlimited remittances. But when it comes to free commerce, we've got to hold something back on Raul in order to ultimately force him to start granting freedoms to his people and civil rights.
75. Why do you want another term?
Well, I almost feel it's an obligation at this point, Michael. It would be easy to walk off the playing field. But now's the time, more than any time, to stand up and fight for Florida, fight for our values, fight for some common sense and some consensus building between the parties. Otherwise, we're going off the rails.
He is running for re-election. You can see the interview in its entirety with Senator Bill Nelson on local10.com.
Also in the headlines this week, gender identity. By the numbers, relatively few people struggle with gender identity issues, and the rest of us are left to struggle to understand and or witness harassment or discrimination that many transgender people describe. That alone is reason enough for gender identity to be protected under the same laws that govern sex discrimination. That question actually comes up before the U.S. Supreme Court next month. But this week, President Trump withdrew federal guidance that protects transgender students' rights to use school bathrooms of their chosen genders. That guidance, under President Obama last year, simply included those bathroom rights in Title IX protections. Title IX, since the early 70s, you may know, requires schools receiving federal money to provide equal opportunities and protections for boys and girls. It's important to note the president's decision changes nothing at the moment because the bathroom guidance is already in legal limbo, challenged in 13 states. But the message is all wrong, especially from a president that had promised to do everything in his power to protect that very community. So suddenly there is this layer of confusion and fear in a population of young people who hardly need more of either. It's important, of course, to be sensitive to those who, probably for faith-based reasons, believe choosing or changing gender is a sin, and that emotion and fear is authentic, but it clouds fact. And the fact is, transgender rights are human rights that need federal constitutional protection and clear guidelines to replace this patchwork of state laws. And it's not up to the president to decide, rather the people and the court to enforce equal protection. So what do you think about that or anything in the news?
We invite you to weigh in. Here are the addresses. Love to hear from you. Remember, stay informed, get involved.
And have a beautiful Sunday.